Right now, on March 10th, 2026, the Middle East has a new supreme leader, and he introduced himself with missiles, not words. Mojtaba Khamenei was appointed Iran's third supreme leader on March 8th. Less than 24 hours later, Iran launched fresh ballistic missile waves at Israel and Gulf states. Iranian state TV made the message explicit. Words painted on the first missile fired under the new leader read, "At your command, Sayyid Mojtaba." That is not symbolism, that is doctrine. And here is what makes this different from anything before. This man lost his wife, his son, and other family members in the same strike that killed his father just 10 days ago. The person now holding the most powerful position in the Islamic Republic watched his family die in a joint U.S.-Israeli airstrike, and within hours of taking power, authorized another wave of attacks. That is not a system searching for an exit ramp. That is a system that has decided this conflict is existential, and acting on that conclusion from its very first hours of new leadership. On February 28th, the U.S. and Israel launched Operation Epic Fury, striking military sites, missile launchers, air defenses, and Iranian government leadership simultaneously across the country. The Israeli Air Force deployed roughly 200 fighter jets, the largest sortie in its history. US B-1 and B-2 bombers joined from bases across the region. The opening strike package was unprecedented in scale. Strikes hit the Pasteur Street compound in Tehran. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei was killed, confirmed by Iranian state media on March 1st, after 37 years as supreme leader of the Islamic Republic. Also killed, Iran's Army Chief of Staff, Defense Minister, the head of the Revolutionary Guard, and a top national security advisor. The entire Defense Council, eliminated in a single operation. That level of institutional destruction had no precedent. A 3-person interim council took over constitutionally, but the IRGC immediately pushed for a permanent successor to be named under fire. On March 8th, the Assembly of Experts voted by decisive majority to appoint Mojtaba Khamenei, the 56-year-old second son of the assassinated leader, as the Islamic Republic's third supreme leader. The announcement came at 3 a.m. Tehran time while strikes were still ongoing. Continuity under bombardment, a deliberate signal of defiance aimed directly at Washington and Tel Aviv. Now here is who Mojtaba Khamenei actually is. Most people outside Iran have never heard his voice. He never ran for office, never gave a public speech. He built power entirely through one channel, the IRGC. Alex Vatanka of the Middle East Institute described him as the candidate closest to the Revolutionary Guard of all those considered, the one the Guard trusted to continue existing doctrine without compromise. The IRGC controls major portions of Iran's economy, intelligence, and internal security. When it backs a supreme leader, it installs its own effective command at the very top of the Iranian state. Within hours of his appointment, Iran launched fresh attacks on Israel and Gulf states. Oil surged toward $120 per barrel. Asian markets dropped sharply. The world registered the signal immediately. In my view, this was not a leadership transition. It was a statement, written in missile trajectories, about what doctrine the Islamic Republic intends to operate under from this point forward. Drop a comment right now. Is Mojtaba Khamenei more dangerous than his father? Hit like if this channel gives you the full picture. Next, what Iran still has left after 10 days of relentless strikes. Here is the number that changes everything about how you read Iran's ongoing missile campaign. And most coverage is not leading with it. That number is 90, as in 90%, the drop in Iran's daily ballistic missile fire since the opening day of this war, confirmed by U.S. Central Command on March 5th. 90% in 10 days. From a country that entered this conflict with roughly 2,000 medium-range ballistic missiles and up to 8,000 shorter-range systems, according to JINSA estimates. Iran fired over 500 ballistic missiles and more than 2,000 drones in the first days of fighting, per CENTCOM data. The scale was real. But the math behind what remains is the actual story here. Before the war, Iran operated approximately 420 missile launchers. According to I-24 News, citing defense sources, as few as 100 to 150 are now believed to remain operational, a drop of roughly 75%. The Israeli Air Force reported disabling over 300 Iranian launchers by March 5th. The Foundation for Defense of Democracies confirmed this, describing a 70% drop in Iran's launch capacity toward Israel. That is not just a weapons count. That is a structural shift in what Iran can actually do next, happening in real time on the first days of Mojtaba Khamenei's leadership. The new supreme leader faces a tension no coverage is naming directly. Firing signals strength domestically. But every launch depletes a stockpile that cannot be replenished under active strikes. U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth listed destroying Iranian missile production as a core campaign objective. The IDF struck Iran's main solid missile fuel production center in Tehran on March 3rd. That specific target matters more than most strikes in this campaign. Solid fuel is what makes Iran's most capable missiles operable. Destroy production capacity, and whatever remains in inventory is all there is. Jinsa's March 6th assessment was direct. Iran's ballistic missile arsenal, built over decades as the core of its military power, fell apart in only a few days of U.S. and Israeli strikes. That is the operational reality Mojtaba Khamenei inherited. Mid-bombardment, mid-depletion, with the assembly of experts announcing his appointment at 3 a.m., while strikes were still ongoing. But here is where most coverage is missing a critical layer. Iran knows its stockpile is shrinking, and it appears to be adjusting strategy in a way that does not require long-range missiles at all. Jinsa analysts noted, Iran is deliberately shifting toward Gulf states using shorter-range systems, not for military effect, but for political leverage on governments hosting American military bases. If Gulf populations absorb sustained pressure, disrupted flights, damaged infrastructure, economic uncertainty, they begin asking whether American military presence is worth the cost of becoming a target. Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and Kuwait are already absorbing that pressure. That lever operates on a completely different timeline than the battlefield, and it does not require ballistic missiles to work. CNN reported on March 4th that at least one U.S. Gulf ally was already running low on interceptor munitions, just 4 days into the conflict. In my view, this is the real equation defining the coming weeks. Iran's offensive capacity is shrinking fast, but defending against even a depleted Iran is consuming U.S. interceptor stockpiles needed elsewhere. Both sides are running a clock. The question is not who runs out first in absolute terms. It is whose leadership can absorb the cost the longest without making a decision they cannot walk back. Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz without firing a single naval gun. That sentence needs a moment because it reframes how this conflict is actually being fought. On March 2nd, a senior IRGC commander declared the strait closed, warning any vessel attempting to pass would be targeted. Maersk, MSC, Hapag-Lloyd, and CMA CGM suspended operations within hours. No naval blockade, no minefield. A handful of drone strikes near the waterway was enough to pull insurance coverage, and without coverage, no captain moves a supertanker. It is de facto closed in that no one dares to go through, Arne Lohmann Rasmussen, chief analyst at Global Risk Management, told CBS News on March 9th. That is the operational reality right now. By March 2nd, Kepler vessel tracking showed traffic had fallen to roughly 8% of normal volume, with over 150 ships anchoring outside the strait. By March 9th, daily transits were near zero. Kuwait cut oil production. Iraq cut 1.5 million barrels per day as storage ran out, per Reuters, citing Iraqi officials. Qatar halted LNG production entirely after Iranian drone strikes hit facilities at Ras Laffan. Oil crossed $100 per barrel for the first time since 2022. Brent logged its largest weekly gain since April 2020. U.S. crude posted its biggest weekly gain in the history of the futures contract, dating to 1983. JP Morgan's Natasha Kanova told clients the market had shifted from pricing geopolitical risk to grappling with tangible operational disruption. That distinction matters more than the price number itself. Helena Croft of RBC Capital Markets called it the biggest energy crisis since the 1970s. European gas futures jumped 30%. LNG freight rates spiked over 40% in a day. Now, here's what most coverage is underweighting. Iran closed this choke point without deploying its navy, using only cheap drones and a warning on an international distress frequency. Kevin Book of Clearview Energy Partners told NPR the mechanism was simple. A few drone strikes near the strait. Insurers decided it was unsafe. That alone halted 20% of global daily oil supply. That is leverage that survives severe military degradation. Iran can lose launchers, commanders, and infrastructure, and still make the insurance math impossible for any commercial operator. As of March 9th, Trump told CBS News the strait was open and ships were entering, while also saying he was thinking about taking it over. Both statements existing simultaneously tell you how unresolved this remains. Trump announced the U.S. Development Finance Corporation would insure ships transiting the Gulf. Markets have not priced that as a complete solution. The real constraint here is not military, it is actuarial. Energy aspects. Analysts noted the U.S. cannot control one-off drone attacks on tankers, and that alone is enough to keep the market extremely cautious regardless of what naval escorts are offered. In my view, the Strait of Hormuz is the strategic center of gravity of this entire conflict, more consequential than any missile count, leadership change, or battlefield result inside Iran itself. Iran spent decades building toward one question. Can a country with an outgunned military still impose unacceptable costs on the global economy? As of March 10th, 2026, the answer appears to be yes. Here's the detail that reframes everything right now. Iran is publicly projecting total defiance, while Ministry of Intelligence operatives quietly reached out to the CIA to discuss terms for ending the war. That contact was delivered through a third country's intelligence service, per the New York Times. Public statements and back-channel behavior are pointing in completely opposite directions at the same moment. Kamal Karazi, foreign policy advisor to the new Supreme Leader's office, told CNN on March 9th there was no immediate off-ramp. The war, he said, would only end through economic pain on the United States. Trump said publicly, "Most of the people we had in mind are dead. Pretty soon we are not going to know anybody." That is not a victory statement. That is a problem about finding someone to end this with. The New York Times framed the core issue. Even if Iran's security establishment decided it wanted a pause, it is unclear whether anyone can enforce it across Iran's fractured and degraded power centers. That is the real constraint on ending this conflict. Not military capability, not political will. The constraint is whether Iran still has an institutional structure capable of signing and delivering a ceasefire. Mojtaba Khamenei has no clerical credentials and no independent political base. His family was killed in the February 28th strike. His first act was authorizing missile launches. His second is inheriting this question. Oman's foreign minister posted on March 4th that off-ramps are available and urged their use. Just days before the strikes, Arakchi had called a diplomatic agreement with Washington within reach of being historic. Pezeshkian, on the interim council, publicly urged diplomacy while telling the U.S. to take its unconditional surrender demand to their grave. Both positions are held at the same time by the same government. Trump told the Times of Israel he would decide, with Netanyahu, when the war ends. Hegseth said the U.S. will set the terms of surrender. No one in Tehran has publicly accepted that framework. What you are watching is not a war with a clean military endpoint. The side losing militarily is still controlling the Strait of Hormuz. The side winning militarily cannot find a coherent counterparty to negotiate with. The Iranian strikes are continuing as of March 10th. Hezbollah resumed rocket fire. Turkish airspace intercepted an Iranian ballistic missile. 7 U.S. service members have been killed. Oil is above $100. The question this video has been building toward is not whether Iran wins or loses militarily. That is not in serious dispute. The question is what the post-war structure looks like, and who is left to shape it. That is the part no financial model, no military briefing, and no cable news segment can answer right now. The new supreme leader has missiles, no navy, no air force, no nuclear program, and no predecessor to call. Watch Oman. Watch the CIA back channel. Watch whether Mojtaba Khamenei consolidates enough internal authority to make any commitment stick. Those are the 3 variables that matter most from here. Drop your read on where this ends in the comments. I want to see how this audience is thinking about the endgame. Like the video if the analysis was useful, and I will see you in the next one.